It is the 200 level, Mike Carpenter in the basement studio on a Wednesday evening, about to talk with Harry Black, the one and only Harry Black, for one of our Hangin' with Harry segments. For those that have listened to me over the years, you know that I love alliteration. So Hangin' with Harry it is. Lots to talk about today. And what I wanted to start off with was something that kind of echoes what I talked about Sunday. Call it a moment of clarity, if you want to go with that, but losing to Penn State in and of itself did not teach me a whole lot new about this team. It reinforced some of the concerns. It alleviated what was my biggest concern, was the defense completely falling off. I think that the way they look Saturday gives Illini fans a lot of reasons to be optimistic. But I will say that it has added a level of clarity for what comes next, and what I need and what I think is fair for Illini fans to, if not expect, demand, which that's a big word, right? But think about this. Illinois sits here at 1-2. According to a metric that I'll share in just a bit, they have the 5th toughest schedule in FBS. That is not all that surprising. Toledo looks pretty good. I know San Jose State took them down to the wire, but Toledo looks pretty good. Kansas looks pretty good. And we know that Penn State's going to be competing for the Big Ten East, despite not looking super dominant, but I think Illinois had something to do with that. So there was this analytic thing online, and call it like a college football KenPom, if you will. I know there's the S&P or the S+P done by ESPN's. I think Bill Connolly's the guy. I don't have access to that, but K Ford Ratings, this is Kelly Ford, does a sort of analytical thing where he breaks down all of the FBS teams and he ranks them, and they adjust each week based on performance. Now, he has Illinois, or I should say he had Illinois at the start of the year, ranked 41st in the country. He expected them to have the 79th best offense, which that's not good, but would be slightly better than last year. And the 6th best defense. Well, he was way off on that, because after the week 1 win against Toledo, Illinois' defense went from 6th to 30th, but cumulatively, they only dropped from 41st as a team to 47th. Losing at Kansas, they dropped another 5 spots to 52. And then after beating Penn State, Kelly Ford has them as the 51st best team in FBS. Okay, this is one metric. And this is not the end-all be-all, but he does take a lot of numbers into his equations here, and he's been doing this for a little bit too. Now, to give you an idea of who you played, he has Toledo ranked 50th, Kansas 55th, or at least they were at the time, and Penn State 6th. Now, coming up, Florida Atlantic, he has 94th, Purdue 66th, and Nebraska 65th. 2 of those are home games. 1 of them is a road game. You are still sitting here, 51st best team in the country, and I'd like to think that we all think this team can play better than what they have, and that an easier schedule will have a lot to do with that. So we're going to get Harry Black on here in just a minute. But that is my mantra this week and the next 3 weeks. You've got to win 3 in a row. Keep it simple. I have no problem just simplifying this whole thing. And if you go 3-0, guess what? You're 4-2 going into a pretty tough road game against Maryland that none of us would expect to win, but what the hell? And then worst case, even if you win the next 3 and lose to Maryland, you're 4-3 with Wisconsin at home on homecoming. That, to me, is something that honestly they should do if they are the team and the program and the coaching staff that we thought they were. They should win the next 3, because Florida Atlantic with a backup quarterback, Purdue with all the issues that they're facing, especially defensively, and a quarterback that, like ours, can't hold on to it. And then Nebraska, don't get me started. Got to win the next 3. So starting with that mindset, we'll ask Harry Black in a bit what he thinks. That's what we'll kind of talk about today. Not just Florida Atlantic, because that's one game. This is the stretch that even before the season started, I think we all felt Illinois could make some hay with, and that's what I hope happens. I hope beyond hope, because 4-2, all things considered, feels good no matter how you got there. All right, before we get Harry Black on, got to remind you, the 200 level is brought to you by DPDough. Online at dpdough.com for all the best deals and prices, dpdough.com. They deliver anywhere in Champaign-Urbana, so go online, order your custom zone with any topping you want, or one of their favorites like the Maui Wowie or the Buffer Zone, online at dpdough.com. Also, Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. You can maybe hear the allergies in me. I hope you don't hear too much today, but it is that time of year. And then pretty soon, before you know it, the chilly nights are going to get cold, and you want a furnace that can work. And Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, they've been doing our furnace and AC checks for over a year now. And our house is warmer than it's ever been in the winter and cooler than it's ever been in the summer. I got to think they have something to do with it. So give them a call at 217-841-4728. That's 217-841-4728 for Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. And also got to thank State Farm agent Brian Hansen. Online at brianismyguy.com. Life, auto, home, business, renters, you name it, Brian is my guy. And he can be your guy as well. We have this new thing with State Farm called Ting. That's T-I-N-G. It is a program, an app on your phone that monitors the electrical system in your home. We have an old home. It's nice to have that peace of mind that it is monitoring this electrical system that might be as old as the place itself. That's just one of the many benefits you get from State Farm, along with the pricing and the great customer service, of course, from Brian and his staff. That's brianismyguy.com for State Farm agent Brian Hansen. And finally, last but not least, Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. Luke Owen and his staff, second to none. It's a smaller staff that can really specialize their work to fit what you need for kitchen, bath, home additions, decks, patios. You can see a gallery of their work online at owenbuildersllc.com. That's Luke Owen and owenbuildersllc.com. Got to thank Champagne Showers Podcast Network, and got to thank you, the listeners. And we've had some new ratings and reviews on Apple Podcast. If you can take the second out of your day to just give us the old rating on Apple Podcasts, whatever that rating may be, it is a big help. All right, let's get the man, the myth, the legend, Harry Black on. All right, Harry. Harry, we're going live, if you can hear me okay. I see his camera there connecting to audio. All right. Does Zoom cooperate? We will find out. Harry is muted. Let's see if we can unmute him. Okay, I see his face.
Yes, I am unmuted.
And I see Harry. But
Let me try to
fix. Harry, keep talking, bud.
Talking. Look at that hair of mine. It does not look great. I got wet hair, and I got glasses on, and I'm just sitting here. I got both the wet hair and the glasses going.
Well, I should be hearing you, so this is peculiar.
Check.
One more time,
check,
Harry.
check.
Let's see. Harry, I think you're good on your end. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. You can hear me. Okay. We can work with this. We'll get a finagle here. Wait a second.
1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2.
Gotcha.
Check. Awesome. You got me?
Yeah, this is going to be, this is all going on to YouTube, this part. I already hit record, so we're just going to go.
I wonder if they're going to hear what I was saying when you couldn't hear me, because it was some great radio. I was literally just saying, damn, look at that hair of mine. It's wet and I got glasses on. Look at me. I'm both wet hair and glasses. I was just saying what I was seeing.
All right, so I think we're good to go now. This is just we'll call this bonus content for the listeners at home.
What is it? BTS, behind the scenes, as the kids say these days.
That's right. Harry, what I was just saying in the opening segment was I have a little more clarity going forward as far as what I would need to see. So I want to get your take on this. Before we delve into the Penn State game and the good and bad that came from that, you have Florida Atlantic coming up, and we will talk about that game specifically. But then you have a struggling Purdue team on the road and Nebraska, a struggling team at home. I'm keeping it really simple, Harry. I'm granting this team some grace for the first 3 games, but we said before the season they can make hay in these 3 games. I think to feel good again, they need to win the next 3. And I don't see any 2-1 situation where the big questions are answered. Where are you at?
For me, it's tough because we came into this season saying that 1-2 was a very realistic possibility, and that in all likelihood, if we went 1-2, we were going to be okay with how we got there. But I don't think anyone really anticipated the offense and, well, the line, the trenches on both sides of the ball just looking, this porous. The last game was kind of an eye opener in that the first two games we looked and said, okay, the offense, or at least Luke Altmaier has something going here. That was not the case against Penn State. Now, you can kind of grant some leniency because you look at that team and say, that's the number 7 team in the country. We didn't play our best game, and we still kind of hung in there a little bit. That was kind of one of those games that I feel like if you like you're no matter how good you are at Illinois, unless you have a season like last year, for the most part, you're going to have games like this past week when you play a team in the top 10 in the country. So that one, it wasn't super shocking. It's not super shocking that we're 1-2. I would say the first 2 weeks are what troubles a lot of fans out there, and I would assume troubles you as well as me. For these upcoming ones, I'm gonna make it even simpler. And I had texted you earlier in the week that this game kind of just reminds me similar to 2019 Eastern Michigan. Not in that I think we're going to lose this game, but in that I think going into that game, I think we were 1-1 or something like that. And going into that game, the thought process was, or maybe 1-2, maybe that was after Nebraska, that shootout that we lost. But the thought process was, well, just take care of business on this one and get back on track. Well, you didn't. And I feel like that's what people are kind of getting at with this FAU game is get back on track, get back to 500, and then attack the real Big Ten slate, the Big Ten West slate. So I think, first things first, you got to take care of business this week. I don't care. I mean, if you go 2-1 with a loss to Purdue, it's worlds different than 2-1 with a loss to FAU, because it's just the going down to 1-3 with a loss to a lower level competition like Florida Atlantic. It just feels different, even though, now that I'm saying it, you'd be in better standings in the Big Ten West, but I don't care. You can't lose to an FAU team after coming out and looking the way you did in the first 2 weeks and to a lesser extent last week against Penn State.
You mentioned 2019. So here's how that season started, if I recall. The first game you beat maybe a Kent State or a Murray State, and then the second game you went to UConn. You won, but UConn sucked. You came home, Eastern Michigan was awaiting, and you were 2-0, but it wasn't a great feeling 2-0, and you thought just start 3-0 and let's see what happens next week against Nebraska. You lose to Eastern, you compete with Nebraska despite giving up 700 yards. Now, this game, I'll be honest though, I need the eye test and style points to matter in this game. And I know that sounds greedy when you're 1-2, but I saw enough positives defensively where I need to see that continue. I think I will. And I need to see the offense finally, which Barry Lunney's been talking about, a lack of identity, which is what he's paid to figure out. I need to see that start to take shape, because I really do think that this is the kind of game, Harry, where it's a get right game in many ways. It's such an opportunity, I think, to parlay a little bit of momentum going into Purdue, even against a lesser team. Am I naive to think that you can start to build on execution, even against an FAU, and that bodes well for you the following 7 days when you go to Purdue? Can you kind of start putting things together with the lesser opponent and then transpose that to the Big Ten team the next week?
I think you can. I think because the way I look at it is if you're able to get back on track against a lesser opponent in FAU, you're going to see it on film. Say Illinois comes out and we win, I don't know, 35-3, some kind of like really impressive, like you said, eye test win, a win that you want to see against a lower level opponent like FAU. If you see yourself doing the right things on the film, you can say, if we do this against, Purdue, against Nebraska, Wisconsin, whoever, then we're going to have a chance to beat any of these teams, regardless of, who we were doing it against in this game right here. You don't want to have a situation where you come out and, eke one by, or maybe you do win like 24-10, but on the film, it just looks like, man, the only reason that we won this game as handily as we did is because of how bad they were. You want to win this game because if you were both to play your A game, yours is that much better than what FAU is going to be able to bring. So I think you can definitely, this is a get right game, like you had said. And I think that if you come out, play better than you did the past 3 weeks, regardless of who you're playing, just if you play better to your own standards against this team, see it on the film, see it on the scoreboard, then that'll get your mentality right going into the Big Ten season.
let's start with the good, because the Penn State game, my dad and I are in the stadium, and I turn to him when it's 13-7. Reggie Love ran it in. The defense is playing as good as they are. I mean, it was a really, I thought, phenomenal performance by the defense for 3 quarters, and then you can at least kind of explain what happened. I mean, they were on the field for so long. Starting with the defense, does that travel? Meaning, what we saw against Penn State and the adjustments they made, I think the simplicity with which they were playing schematically and the attacking nature, can they just, I don't know, run that out there again and hope for the same result? Do they have the personnel, you think, where they can just run it and continue to play as well as they did?
Well, I think what kind of hurt us in the first 2 weeks, and I'm an offensive lineman at heart, so what I know about defense is what I see and what I've heard in the film rooms. But I mean, you look at your struggles in the first 2 weeks, and it was against mobile quarterbacks. Drew Auer wasn't a mobile quarterback. You were able to, not have that problem yet you had to deal with last week, and that might have had something to do with why you were able to perform as well as you did. Also, yeah, I think just going back real quick, the defense was not the problem last week. You look at the scoreboard, 30 points. Yeah, that doesn't tell the whole story. What was it, 5 turnovers, 4 interceptions, and a fumble? They held them to, 6 points in the first half on those turnovers, and then the floodgates open because you're playing the 7th ranked team in the country. You can't keep giving them the ball at the 40-yard line, at the 35-yard line. So yeah, the defense was not the problem last week, and I think that if you come into this game, because I believe you said earlier in the week, you told me Casey Thompson will be out for FAU.
Yeah,
correct?
their backup is Central Michigan's former starter, who he had some okay games. He cannot run. At least he does not have any track record of running, which Casey Thompson did. So I think the matchup on its face is better.
Yeah, so in that regard, I think that helps you out tremendously, because you are going to be able to treat this game maybe like you're playing a not near, I'm going to say not as good Drew Auer, not nearly as good Drew Auer, and whoever their quarterback is now over at FAU that's going to be taking snaps instead of Thompson. So, I mean, I would imagine you should be able to run out this similar game plan, albeit I'm sure that their FAU's offense is not verbatim the same. But if you're able to just, win in the trenches like you were able to do on defense last week, because you were doing pretty well in the trenches for the most part. Their running back did not have until he had one good run for the touchdown. It was 15 yards, again, in the second half. So if you're able to win in the trenches again, that offense of FAU should not be a problem, especially with the backup quarterback they're trotting out there.
Let's talk about Johnny Newton, because on this podcast this year, he's sort of the given going in, and sometimes you don't talk about the given as much because you know what you got. So from your perspective as a former offensive lineman, if you were watching tape on him, or as you watch him now, what flashes through your mind if you were to have been told, okay, block him?
I'll tell you what, man, because he lines up in the middle, between the guards or the center. All I'm thinking if I'm seeing that guy is first of all, God, I hope I have a double team, because he's that big of a guy. And then also, a lot of times the way you look at it as an offensive lineman is if you do your job, if everyone on the offensive line does their job and you're not put on an island, then you shouldn't really have, that much of a problem of getting your job done. As a center, every time I went out there, I knew I had help, whether it be from the left guard or the right guard. So that made my job that much easier. Now, the problems arise, for the offensive line, if you tell the guard, left guard, say you're running a zone play to the right, and Johnny Newton's lined up on the left guard's inside eye, right? Not to the point where the center can give him any help because maybe he's closer to the guard than the center, and you're running a zone to the right. First of all, you should never be doing that if Johnny Newton's right there, because you're telling that guard you have to cut off this guy and, get some push up to the linebacker if you're able to do that. That's a preseason All-American right there. He's not going to let you be able to do that. So that's kind of where you see a situation where you're going to have the advantage if you're Illinois, if you have Johnny Newton lined up right there. So, I mean, a lot of times if I'm an offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman, looking at a guy like that who I see as a game wrecker like that, I'm kind of knowing that we're going to have to be able to audible to something that's more favorable, get plenty of double teams, make sure you're not always, don't run towards him, because he's going to be able to wreck some things. Also, don't ask your offensive linemen to make those more difficult blocks.
The other thing I was encouraged by was that I didn't notice bad linebacking play. And I think that's partially due to the schematics. So, for example, it seems as if we want to lump Seth Coleman and Gabe Akis, they're I don't know if they're more edge rushers or outside linebackers. They call them outside linebackers. But those two guys and Tariq Barnes, I thought, had good games. And there was only one time where I saw Tariq Barnes get caught up in one of those drag routes on a wide receiver going across the field, and he just wasn't fast enough to keep up. So I'm encouraged by the schematics, but I'm also encouraged by the simple notion that they're kind of letting those three guys. I just imagine they simplified everything. It's like, just go. Here's your gaps. Sometimes we rush, but whatever you're doing, you're attacking. It just seemed to me like they were a big reason why Illinois' defense stifled the run game, because the guys in front of them helped, of course, but they were where they needed to be, most importantly. And it just seemed like Gabe Akis looked fast again. Seth Coleman looked loose again. And Tariq Barnes looked like a steady middle linebacker kind of guy. I don't know if you picked up on them or not, or if it's maybe good that we didn't pick up on them as much because they weren't lacking.
Yeah, I see that kind of comes to the point, or the fact that you're playing the kind of level of competition that you were last week. I think that when you see guys kind of rise up to that standard, it's because they know that they have to bring their A++ game if they're going to want to have a chance against the number 7 team in the country. Now, we had mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the struggle then, or the challenge for the coaching staff, is to make sure that you keep those guys, with that intensity going into this week in a game against a team that's not the number 7 team in the country in FAU. So, I mean, that's the challenge that the coaches are going to have. Just make sure you have the same intensity coming out here, because I think that, all around, the defense looked so much better last week than they had in the first 2 weeks. And that's against a Penn State team that was, I think they put up 60 points the week before, albeit against Delaware, but still, a team that's lighting up the scoreboard, and you're able to, really that game probably should have been in the lower 20s if the offense wasn't giving them the ball inside your red zone, like every drive in the first half. So I think the challenge is for the defensive coaching staff, just make sure that they stay on the same page as they were last week, with the same kind of intensity, knowing that this is a get-right game, but we need to come out here, guns a-blazing to get ready for Purdue the next week.
I did mention this in my opening segment, but losing Matthew Bailey, I know hurts. He did look good in the few plays that he was out there. I was encouraged by the secondary. There was the one play at the end of the first half where I think it was Tyler Strain might have been covering and he got burned, and that set Penn State up for the field goal. But I'm very encouraged by Xavier Scott. He to me looks the part of just the next stud D-back for Illinois. And everybody else seemed to just kind of keep Penn State in front of them. They were playing a lot more man, I think, too. So I guess my question, Harry, is as you watch that defense, did you start to see the original vision that we had for it, meaning the defensive line gets to the quarterback, causes pressure, and they make the most inexperienced part of your defense, the secondary, look that much better as a result?
Yeah, and I think you could see that was the case early on in the second half. Obviously they looked as good as they did in the first half. But the part that I was most encouraged with was the multiple 3-and-outs he had coming out in the second half. That shows that even though Penn State went into the half seeing that they needed to make adjustments because they weren't able to punch it in on a short field against this young secondary, that even though they tried to come out and make adjustments, they weren't able to necessarily do everything that they wanted to. We saw earlier in the year you were struggling. Last year you had your struggles with, Indiana in that game, aside from the fact you lost, but they were able to really kind of move the ball with all the help that you gave them, but also the fact that, they were able to move the ball as much as they did. And I think that, it was encouraging. I think that going forward, I think really what you want to see is just, I feel like a broken record, but at this point, you just want to see them kind of coming out with the same intensity. That's what I saw this past week that we didn't see week 1 against Toledo. You couldn't really tell if you saw it against Kansas because you went down so quickly and they were spreading the field as much as they were. But if they're able to play similarly, if the defense is able to come out and play similar to how they played against Penn State, I think that you're gonna probably be looking back at that 7-win mark.
I think so too. And that's why I'm kind of looking at this 3-game stretch and saying if the defense does that, I think we're good in these next 3 games. But then that leads to the new resounding question.
Yep.
We'll get to Luke Altmaier in a second. Beyond Luke Altmaier's turnovers, What worries you about the offense?
It's got to be the offensive line. I mean, we came into this season thinking that the offensive line was going to be, not equivalent to the defensive line, but was going to have similar strengths. You're going to be able to move the ball, not maybe move the line of scrimmage the same way you were last year because of the Heisman contending running back that you also had that kind of helps out that cause. But just look at the coaching staff and look at Bielema. He has a track record of offensive line play. And you came in thinking that wasn't going to be a problem. And we have had some injuries. I mean, you're not going to look at this offensive line and say that it's it's healthy, missing some pieces from last year that are now, whether they're just graduated or in the NFL. But I think that's got to be the most worrying problem, because this past week it was Luke. Obviously, I mean, 4 interceptions. You're not going to win a game against pretty much anyone if you throw 4 interceptions. But all 3 weeks, it's been the fact that you're not able to move the offensive line. You have very little, if any, running game. I think last week wasn't your or 2 weeks ago, your leading rusher was Luke. That should never be the case, especially against a defense like Kansas. So, I mean, I think that if the year goes on and you continue to see these problems on the offensive line, that's going to be a thorn in the side of, really, honestly, the defense, if anything, because they're going to be looking and saying, look at what we're doing out here. We're giving you guys a chance. You're not able to move the ball. You're not able to move the offensive line. You're not going to win any games in the Big Ten West, especially of all divisions, if you're not able to, be able to move the line up front. So it's obviously what I look at the most, but I really think most people would say that's what's been most troublesome with this offense so far.
We'll get to Luke in a second, but quick side question here. Is there a schism that can develop between units? And if so, one unit's playing much better than the other. If so, is it ever spoken? Is it felt? Does it just make a sort of toxic environment? How does that work?
I don't if there is, it doesn't come up in practice. It doesn't come up in the locker room. At least it never did when I was at University of Illinois. It comes out. I shouldn't say it doesn't come out in practice. It doesn't come out when you're not on the field. It doesn't, everyone gets along. You have to spend this much time with all these people in the locker room, whether, training camp or throughout the season, in the weight room, in the training table, everywhere. You spend upwards to 40, 50, 60 hours a week with these guys every week. That's redundant. But, when you see any kind of, schism between parts of the team, it's when you see, maybe you go into this week, say we're playing FAU this week and it's the second quarter and we just had our third 3-and-out. God, I hope that doesn't happen, but say that happens. That's a situation where you could see, maybe, I don't know, a defense. It's always a weird position group too. It's like a cornerback comes over to the offensive line and says, what the bleep are you guys doing out there? You're not moving the ball. It's like, and we know we're not doing our job if that's the case. We look over at this guy and say, the hell do you know? You're not an offensive lineman. You don't know what we have to do. But it doesn't mean necessarily that they're wrong. And that's where you can kind of see like those flare-ups on the sideline. And yeah, I mean, that's really the extent of when you see that. It's never anything. And honestly, that goes away after the game. That goes away after a few plays, because it's the heat of the moment. Everyone's out there, testosterone, adrenaline just pumping through the veins. And you don't BS with anyone. You got to get, right to the point of what we need to do to win this game right now. Okay. So that's why you'll see that kind of stuff on the sidelines in games, in practice, but you're not going to see that necessarily on a personal level.
Okay. And that's, thank you for that clarification, because I've always wondered that, and I'm worried that could happen to this team, because I have more concerns than just Luke Altmaier, but let's start there. I like Luke. Weirdly enough, Harry, I'm still excited to watch him on Saturday in a way that I haven't been for an Illini quarterback in a long time. Tommy DeVito was steady, and of course I loved watching him. But in terms of, I knew he was a rental, so to speak. In terms of a long-term Illini quarterback, I mean, not even Nathan Shieldhouse got me as excited, like, oh, I can't wait. Because we saw right before the third, I think, pick of Luke Altmaier. What was the play before that? He gets slammed, and he hits Isaiah Williams for a 25, 30-yard gain. I mean, it's that kind of play that I haven't seen in a long time. So I know it's there. And yet That's the stuff that loses you games. So is it now simply game planning around that? My worry is that we overcompensate. We don't let Luke be the occasional gunslinger for fear of him turning the ball over. And then just kind of like Justin Fields is having with the Chicago Bears and all that mess, it becomes a head game. And I think the looser he is, the better. But I don't know, is there a way to channel that just enough so he's not throwing 4 freaking picks a game?
I mean, it's tough because the comparison you'll hear, and it's a comparison people always go to when you see a talented quarterback or a guy that likes to throw the ball but has problems with turnovers. You go right to Brett Favre.
Yeah.
And the question with him was, do you want to corral him? Because, and I'm talking about Brett Favre now. Do you want to corral him and make it so, yeah, he's not throwing 4 or 5 interceptions in a playoff game, if that means that maybe, in another playoff game, he's going to throw for 500 yards? Because you're not putting any restrictions on him. He's able to go out and do what he does best, which is basically play playground football. I think that there's, on the way I look at it is it's not a focal point of the or it shouldn't be a focal point of the offensive coordinator to go out there and focus on one position group and get the absolute best out of them to the detriment of the rest of the team. If he's having a problem throwing the ball, you run the ball. That's my offensive lineman's simplistic way of looking at it. If you're having a problem turning the ball over, maybe get into a situation where you're doing more short game stuff, running the ball more screens, just stuff that's low turnover probability, whether it's to get his confidence back or whether it's just because that's what's working. And then when you see that, okay, this guy's got a little bit more confidence in his passing game, then maybe you can try to stretch the field. That's the way I look at it. I look at a game last week, and what I say if I'm the offensive coordinator to Luke is, you know what? We're going to look at the film, and we're going to burn the film. We're going to ignore any of that. I'm not going to tell you not to go out and play the way that you've played your whole life, but I am going to tell you, take an extra. If it's not there, don't force it. To say it's such a fine line to walk, and they're talking about it nowadays with Josh Allen, who's got a problem turning the ball over. But do you want to corral Josh Allen? Tell him, don't take the chances you've taken that got you to the point where you're a top 3 quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think that Luke might be able to handle that. So at the moment, I don't have long-term concerns about Luke because for all the interceptions, I do want to be fair to him. I thought one of the 2 against Kansas, that was on Pat Bryant, clearly, plain as day. You could argue Isaiah Williams could have snagged that second one. The first game, there was one bad decision, but that was literally the only one. So I'm looking at 2 bad decisions through 2 games and then 4 glaring ones against a top 10 team. That's a major step up in competition. And yet he still made some throws that makes me excited to see him on Saturday. So I guess this leads to a conversation about wide receivers, because you mentioned you're most concerned about offensive linemen, and they kind of make the whole thing run. I am concerned that outside of Isaiah Williams, it doesn't appear like Casey Washington or Pat Bryant are getting much separation. Can you scheme around that? Or is it just simply a matter of probably better get Malik Elzy a few more snaps, probably better get Wilcher with his speed a few more snaps?
I mean, a lot of times, and again, this is I have to preface this by making sure that people know that I am a former, University of Illinois football player. I am not a former wide receiver, so I've not been in that position group room with those guys. But the way I look at it a lot of times is, it's your matchups, it's your individual matchups. Last past week, you went up against, Big Ten East level secondary. It's not going to be the same as what you played against Toledo, and it's not going to be the same even against a Big 12 defensive secondary like Kansas, even though Big 12 is not necessarily renowned for their defense as of late. So that's where I would be more troubled than this past week. I think I don't know if maybe you want to turn to the younger guys, because the way I look at it is we've seen Pat Bryant, and especially we've seen Casey Washington, make some big plays. I would say you don't turn to the younger guys until you get later on in the season and you're still having these problems. If you have problems against FAU in your, with separation you're getting with your wideouts, then I think maybe you start to look at personnel, because at that point, you don't know what the hell's going on.
All right, so the offense is going to be what everyone's watching, and I understand that. One reason that I'm encouraged, Harry, about the timing of this game, and I know everybody would have liked the Florida Atlantic game before Penn State, but in a way, I'm trying to view these first three games as ripping the Band-Aid off, getting it over with, and that hopefully it bodes well for them starting now. The FAU game, to me, screams a major opportunity to play Bret Bielema football, meaning a good opening scripted plays to get the first score. The defense, unlike the Toledo game, is raring to go right away. And you just sort of chip your way to a 13-point lead, to a 20-point lead, and then you just kind of run the damn clock out. I mean, just to me, it seems like, as I mentioned a few questions ago, that this is the kind of game where finally they can establish the run and they can get that execution down before they go to a much tougher game in West Lafayette next Saturday.
I mean, this game for me is I feel like the common fan wants to see, okay, you had three tough opponents. Now you have FAU. Let's go beat them by 40. Honestly, what you just laid out, I'd be completely fine with. If you come out, you score a touchdown on your first drive, 3 and out for them, touchdown, 3 and out for them. I mean, this is extreme. But if you're up 14-0, just run the ball for the rest of the game. Don't chance anything. Don't let them back in the game. Don't have a situation where you're going into the third quarter. It's like 14-7, and then you hear the announcer say something like, Illinois had every chance to put this game away, but they really let FAU hang around, and then boom, it's a tie game after like a scoop and score for them. So what I just want to see from this game is a very short game. Honestly, I'd be fine. You should win this game by 3 scores. But at the same time, I would have no problem if the score was like 17-0. If you were just able to completely shut them down and make it clear that we got what we needed to get done early on, and from there on out, it's kind of similar to what the Eagles did last year. They would go up on teams huge in the second quarter, and then they would do nothing in the third and fourth quarter because all they were doing was running the ball. And people were saying, why can't this team score in the third or fourth quarter? They can't really put teams away. Well, they put them away in the second quarter, and then they just run the ball, and their defense is that good. That's what you want to see from Illinois in a game against FAU this week. You want to see they establish the run game early, they establish the run game early and maybe score through the air. And then from there on out, that run game is able to, 1st and 10, 2nd and 4, 3rd and 1, 1st and 10, do that down the field, touchdown, field goal, whatever. Then the defense gets the ball back, 3 and out. That's what this game should be.
I'd like that. And I do think that Reggie Love, the way he's been running, the way he ran against Penn State, I'm encouraged by that. I got to ask you, though, Josh McCray, I know he's not having the biggest holes to run through, but there's something lacking. And I do think that on Saturday, you'll see more reps for Fagan. You'll see McCray get carries because they're going to try to get him going. But at a certain point, whatever the eye test is telling my layman's eyes, there's no it factor to Josh McCray right now. And I don't know if you've seen the same thing or if you can speak on that. Or, I mean, what are we looking for to running back to tell us that, oh, hey, it's not his fault, it's just the offensive line? I mean, maybe that's the case, but I'm just seeing no burst or anything from McCray. And that fumble, at that point, honestly, Harry, I was ready to say, you just got to move on. And I know that's probably rash, but I mean, you got another big boy in Fagan in there who is a freshman, yes, but ready to go.
I would say, as far as, is it the offensive line? Is it the running back? The easiest way to look at that without just looking at film and seeing if the running back isn't, hitting the holes that are provided is just to look at the other running backs in the backfield that are taking snaps. And you've said Reggie Love has been showing improvement over the first 3 weeks. Neither one of the running backs looked very good week one, aside from one run from Reggie early on. And then late in the game, you had a couple of runs like 5 or 6 yards. But we've seen improvement from Reggie over the last 3 weeks. And like you said, Josh just hasn't been able to have the same kind of impact. So, I mean, as far as the reason why, running back is a brutal position. I mean, I'm used to people diving at my knees, and I'm used to contact every play. These guys got to run full speed into people that are like, not 2 times their size, but like have 60, 70, 80 pounds on them. At least at an offensive lineman, you're going up against someone similar to your size. These guys have to run full speed. So Reggie, he's doing what he can, but even on a good run where he finds the hole, runs up the middle for 6-7 yards, gets popped by a linebacker, that takes a toll on you. So you don't want him to go out there. He's gonna get beat up. So that's why I think that they're bringing out a guy like Josh to try to take some of the load off of him. And then as far as why they're going with him over Fagin, I think it's just a seniority thing at that point. You want to go with the guy who maybe has shown something over the last couple of years, even if that something is just some game film, because I know Josh has had his problems with injury, but I mean, they do want to do anything they can to try to go with the people who have more seniority simply because they have more of a feel for the game than the younger guys.
Yeah, I'm going to be watching that to see the splits between them. I think Reggie Love starts inching his way up to a good 60, like 2/3 of the carries. And then they figure out what the Thunder counterpart to be, whether that be McCray or if they just say, hey, Fagin gives us a chance. I was encouraged that Fagin got some carries. I was encouraged that LZ got some looks and Wilcher too. And I expect all of them to get significant tick in this game. Hopefully, you mentioned in the second half when they have a big lead and they could afford such a thing. I want to ask you, Harry. So I mentioned at the start of our conversation that I'm looking at this as a 3-game window. We did that in the preseason talk that we had, that this is the easiest 3-game stretch, period. What's the record after these 3 games?
I mean, you really, because you've been pushing that you want our record to be 4-2. And I don't think there's any reason it can't be 4-2. I think the toughest one is going to be Purdue. I mean, Nebraska's looked just bad. They were anemic on offense. They were, pretty much outclassed by Colorado. I mean, Colorado's good. I think that they got a lot of hype because they got Dion. They beat a ranked team in week 1. TCU probably shouldn't have been ranked, but you can't not have the defending, runner-up not ranked. Nebraska's bad, and then they beat Colorado State on a late touchdown drive. Colorado's a good team. Colorado's also going to be 3-2 in 2 weeks after they lose to Oregon and then USC. So that loss for, Nebraska losing by, I think it was like 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's not a great loss for them. So and then you have them at home. That should be a win for you. That should be a win for you guys. I cannot believe if you told 10 years ago, Harry, that Nebraska should be more of an automatic win than Purdue, then I'd say, what the hell is going on over in Lincoln? But I think I do think you're going to win this week pretty handily, like how I hope you win it the way I just laid out. Then you go into West Lafayette. I mean, Ryan Walters is not getting the defense working the way that people thought he was going to be able to do. I mean, he gave up 35 points to Syracuse. And I mean, what was it? Week 1, he gave up 40 points almost to Fresno State. I understand Fresno State's a good group of 5 team, but that's 2 games right there. You're giving up close to 80 points combined. And who they played week 2? Was it Virginia
they played
Tech?
Virginia Tech, who just lost 35-20 against Rutgers. So I don't know what to think about Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to check with you. Are you still, like Trevor, on the bandwagon that we smoked Purdue, or has the first 3 games given you pause because we aren't passing the eye test either?
I don't think we're going to smoke them anymore. I would love if you did. Oh my God. If you have a similar, what was it? The Keyshawn Vaughn game in 2015 where you go up there and you beat them by 30 points, that'd be awesome. But I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a similar game to what you had last year against them, which that game looked really ugly and I have awful memories of it. I hate that game. It was still a 1-touchdown game at the end, and I think it was tied going into the 4th quarter. It was a close game, even though we didn't look how we wanted to look, that year up to that point. God, I hate that game. But never mind that. I think you could have a similar looking game this in 2 weeks against Purdue. And I mean, I hate to say it because I don't want to go 2-1 in these next 3, and I think you definitely can go 3-0. I think you should beat FAU. No, I shouldn't even say that. I think you will beat FAU. I think you should beat Nebraska. And I think that Purdue, I'm more in the camp that Purdue might be a toss-up. I'm more in that camp. And if you come out of Nebraska and what would you be at that point? You'd be 3-3 after those 3. Depending on how you look against Purdue, if it's a close game, and you look better, then I wouldn't be completely my expectations would certainly say, okay, now just get to 6 as opposed to, okay, you're a contender in the Big Ten West, which I still think you are just because the Big Ten West is god awful. But no, I think 3-0, I'm feeling good. There is a path with 2-1 if that one loss is against Purdue on the road and it's close, where I'm not feeling awful. But that's the only path where I'm not feeling that way.
Yeah, I think the 3-0 for me also comes from the vibe around the stadium and the tailgate lots, and the fact that Penn State, the 48,000 people that were in there, Harry, when it was 13-7, and then even the 3-0 we got to start the second half. It's like, whoa, I mean, this could happen. I mean, legit, I turned to my dad, I said, I think this is how upsets happen. Stops like that. Yeah, momentum building. The sideline is in front of us, and we see, okay, they're feeling it. They're feeling it. So I look at the overall temperature of the fan base that right now at this moment at 1-2 is thinking, oh, great, we're going to suck again. And that you can bring them right back in, even though the next 3 teams are by no means world beaters, and none of them are necessarily even high quality wins, even though any road win in the Big Ten is a quality win. But that would be enough. If you go 4-2 into Maryland, that game's a cherry on top. What the hell? Give it your best shot, because worst case scenario, you'd be 4-3 coming back for homecoming against Wisconsin, and 4-3 coming into homecoming with a chance to go 5-3 against Bret Bielema's old team. What I'm looking for, Harry, to be honest, beyond my personal enjoyment, is a way to ratchet back up the momentum that, if we're being honest, has dissolved from last year. At this moment, it is gone. And I want that contra back up. And I think they can do that in 3 games.
Yeah, and you could feel it a little bit. I mean, against Toledo, you could feel the momentum just with the amount of people that were there. The excitement around after that first drive and how you were looking early again, in that game. I do think while, and now that you're mentioning, because I guess I was mistaken with the schedule. I thought it went Nebraska, then Wisconsin, but it is, now that you mention it, it is, God, it's I'm not going to say it's necessary, but it would be such a better look for, like you said, the fan base, if you come into that Wisconsin game with a winning record. Because if you beat FAU and you lose to Purdue, that Nebraska game is going to be, I mean, what are we looking at? 30 something?
Well, no, because Nebraska's dopey ass fans will travel 15,000 of those dopes coming from Nebraska. I guess they spend money in town. I had a whole thing on that Sunday. But here's why I think too. We agree. I assume that the Maryland game, it don't look good on paper. And that's just, it's a bad matchup in a weird place that you don't really play. There's not much of a history. It's hard to get a good feel on that game regardless. But I do think that just the optics of, as you were starting to say, they're 4-3 as opposed to a 3-4 record when Wisconsin comes to town, when you're going to have your biggest crowd of the year, as you always do for homecoming, and it's a good opponent. Now, I will say that the other part of me, Harry, why I so badly kind of need them, if I'm being honest, to win these 3 games, if they don't, we're going to find ourselves one whole half of the way into the season wondering what the hell this is. I think by winning the next 3 games, it doesn't tell us they're going to win the Big Ten West, because I wouldn't be convinced of that. But I would be convinced that the coaching staff cured the major ailments that bothered this team in the first 3 games. And that this coaching staff can, in fact, out-scheme and out-coach a first-year Ryan Walters staff and a first-year Matt Rule staff. Which, if we're being honest, Harry, that is the crux of it for me. It's year 3 of Bielema versus year 1 of stinky Purdue and stinky Nebraska. I think the year 3 coach has to win. I think he does.
More like Purdue did. I'm sorry, I wouldn't even said it if you didn't.
Nebraska.
No. Oh my God. No, that's where it comes down to coaching. That's where it comes down to coaching.
Do you think is that oversimplifying to say that, hey, per year Bret Bielema win those games?
I think that's fair. Because, I mean, and then even if you want to expand it a little bit more to when you go into homecoming playing Luke Fickell, who still has not shown he can do it at the Big Ten level. I know he looked great at Cincinnati, but he did not look good back in the day at Ohio State, and through however many weeks now at Wisconsin, he went from a ranked team to an unranked team like that. So, I think because you also got to look, Bret's got his guys at this point. Whether he's got some Lovey guys, he does, but he's got most of his guys. Matt Rule does not. Luke Fickell does not, and I'm missing one. And yeah, Ryan Walters does not. Yeah, so at that point, you should be able to say this is where you take advantage of the inexperienced, or at least where they're at, inexperienced coaching staffs. Because, I mean, that's a real thing. That's why you see these coaches, if you look back at their history, PJ Fleck's first year at Western Michigan, not at Minnesota, at Western Michigan, I think he went 1-11. The next year, I think they were a bowl team. The next year, they were in the Cotton Bowl. So it doesn't matter. I mean, most times, unless it's Sonny Dykes at TCU and you have Max Duggan, single-handedly getting you to the college football championship, most of the times you're going to have your struggles. And if you have a coach in Bret who is a good coach, regardless of what we see in these past couple of weeks, and I know people love to go back to Arkansas, what are you going to do when you have a conference with Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, and the likes of LSU, Florida, the entire conference, aside from Arkansas and Vanderbilt and those lower level teams, are blue chips for the most part. So I try to look at what he did at not even a similar division, the same division, a very similar team in Wisconsin to what Illinois wants to be. So Bret, those are the games where you should go into them and say, we got this. Even if we're calling games like Purdue and Wisconsin toss-up games, you have to go in those and say, they're toss-up games. Oh, wait, it's Ryan Walters. Oh, wait, it's Luke Fickell, first-year coach. We got this.
Yeah, that's my hope, Harry, because I think that I am still a big Bret Bielema fan. And to be honest, it would take quite a bit for me to change my mind that he's not the best opportunity we have to solidify something. I strongly believe that. And that's why I think the first 2 weeks were more jarring than the third, because even though you lost 30-13 to Penn State, we got out to the tailgate and Kara asked my dad, so did Michael stay cool in the stadium? Because she saw the score, and he was like, no, he didn't get mad at all. Because I honestly, even with the interceptions, I was more bemused. Like, oh, shucks. And I know there's a more serious than just saying, oh, shucks. There are 4 turnovers by your starting quarterback. I don't care if it's a number 17 or not. That's an issue. Yet it felt more like Bret Bielema ball, meaning I saw a defense and I trusted the defense again. They got on the field and I'm like, I think they'll get the stop. And I hadn't felt that really since the Mississippi State game. I'll give Aaron Henry this. He's had, I think, 2 of his 4 games have been very well coordinated, and I'm excited to hopefully see him turn into a really good coordinator. But I think, though, for a lot of people, you mentioned the Arkansas thing, it's this weird kind of nugget in the back of our heads where we would look at the record at Arkansas and say, hey, at Illinois, that works. But when you're living it and you start having uncharacteristically bad performances against lesser teams, that's where the sound fundamental football that Bret Bielema you associate with, you start getting a little confused and scared. And I think there are probably a few Illini fans that are scared. Oh my God, what if this doesn't work out? And I understand that.
Yeah, I also got to say, though, I mean, and this is coming from someone who, I'm not going to say 5 days out of the week, but at least once or twice a week, I'm running the board for the Paul Feinbaum show. So I'm hearing all these SEC fans and the expectations of every fan base. And I don't care if it's, obviously Alabama's expectations are what they are and Georgia's are what they are these days. LSU fans think they're winning a national championship. Auburn fans think they're winning a national championship. Even down to Arkansas, they think this is our year to compete for a SEC division title. The expectations in the SEC are higher because that's what life is down there in the Southeastern Conference. I do think that even though, like you had said, there's a portion of the fan base that thinks, oh my, oh my stars, what if this happens, similar to
Oh, gee.
oh, good golly.
Oh, no.
to what happened over at Arkansas. I mean, he was getting bowl games. He was doing what we say if we get a coach here to accomplish that, which is 6 wins, 7 wins, the occasional 5 wins, 7 wins, 8 wins, 5, something like that. I don't think that I think the fan base honestly wouldn't have a huge problem with that because that's what we've been looking for. And because the expectations are lower here than what they are, even at a school like Arkansas, because it's the SEC.
He is in a somewhat unfair position because we have as a fan base this, oh boy, what would it be called? Not stigma, but basically syndrome, mental PTSD thing where you have a successful year and then you go 5-7 the next year. It's just in my mind, I'm like, enough. And then to make that even more frustrating, the first 3 games. Okay, I recognize those were tougher. And then the reason I'm looking at these next 3 with so much urgency in a way is, okay, schedules don't get much easier than this. And not just the next 3 games. When the toughest game the rest of the way, the toughest 2 games are at Maryland and at Iowa, 2 teams that are not ranked. Is there a ranked team on the schedule the rest of the way? Not right now.
Not. The only team you would think maybe might get there would be Iowa, or has Maryland lost a game yet? I think if they win, but again, they're in the Big Ten East, so I could say unless they're not playing Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State in the next 3 weeks, which is I'm assuming they're playing at least one of them, then they're not going to be ranked either. So yeah, you're no ranked teams right now. The only one I would say would be maybe Iowa later on.
Yeah. So to me, it's like, well, God dang it. Just, okay. Yes. Win 6. And I would agree, just make a bowl game. But I do think that the next 3 games will tell the tale as to whether or not we are simply chasing 6 or whether things have leveled off where we can comfortably say, hey, 7-5 is right there for him. And I do think there's a little bit different feeling there where, yes, of course, you'll take whatever bowl game, but a 7-5 record, even with the bad start, and even if there's going to be bumps along the way, which you can still afford 3 more losses if you get to 7-5 against this weak-ass schedule, that you still feel, hey, it's already kind of solidifying here. And I think that would just do wonders for a fan base that has just been perpetually had the rug pulled out from under them after successful years.
Yeah, I mean, if you come away from this season 7-5, not feeling great, let's say we lose to Maryland, Iowa, and I don't know, Minnesota or Wisconsin, one of those 2.
Right.
And you still find your way to 7-5, which is, considered after last year and also considered just the way it's felt a bad year. Hell, I'll take that, 10 times out of 10 if, as an Illinois alum, as an Illinois fan. And until that gets old, which I'd love for that to get old, because what gets old right now is what you had just said. This is my first real taste of, all right, bowl game or a good season followed up by nothing. And, I don't have great experience with that. The limited amount I have is we got to a bowl game by the skin of our teeth in 14 and then missed one by the skin of our teeth in 15. So that, I think it's right there for the taking. And when, like you said, hardest games left are Maryland and Iowa. Even 2 games that I would not be shocked if you won either one of them. I'd be surprised. But if you won either one of them, I'd want to be like, oh my God, how did we just beat Iowa? Because now that we've seen it, also Iowa, come on, they're boring. They literally have to give incentives to their offensive coordinator to get an average amount of points each year or each game so that he doesn't get fired. That's how bad their offense was last year.
And I tell you what, Harry, is I look at that schedule, and I would agree that the Wisconsin, Minnesota games, as long as you split those, you're looking pretty good. But Minnesota, Bret Bielema was undefeated against them. Minnesota with whatever the quarterback's name is, with 78 consonants in his name. No. I'm just saying that the fact that this is why I'm so heartened, because there was a chart that had Power 5 quarterbacks efficiency ratings. And Luke Altmaier and Hudson Card were kind of right there. Freaking Mordecai from Wisconsin has a lower efficiency rating than Luke Altmaier. And we're expecting Luke Fickell to rattle off 8 wins this year. Alex Kakalakis, whatever, is behind that. And then Jeff Sims, derp, is sitting there second worst Power 5 quarterback because he can't hit the broadside of a barn unless it's wearing the opposing team's colors. So all that is to say, when you play crap quarterbacks and your strength is your defense, it's time to win some games. And I'm not saying Hudson Card does have an it factor that makes, there's a reason Purdue's scary. It's not Ryan Walters. It's not because of Purdue. It's the fact that they have a quarterback, yes, that can make plays. Whereas Jeff Sims is going to derp his way to a loss, and the guy from Central Michigan is probably not going to rally for Atlantic. So I know we can talk about it all. I think it's this simple. If Luke Altmaier shapes up and the defense plays like they did, you got quite a few more games you're going to win this year. And there is a nice sort of, that's all you got to do. Because I think there's less questions for Illinois to answer to find their way to 7 wins than maybe some other teams, even after this bad start.
I feel like the question for Luke going forward is not, can he be the reason that you win games against, teams like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Kakalakis, and
I think it's Kakalakis, whatever. Who cares?
Yeah. And, Northwestern Indiana, you're not asking him to go out there and throw it for 350 yards and beat those teams. You're asking him to hand off the ball and move the trenches and make the occasional 3rd down 5 pass on those games. What you want to see from Luke eventually, and you don't really have a chance to see it this year unless, I guess, maybe some kind of matchup in a bowl game. But what you want to see from him eventually is a game down the road over the next 2 years where, all right, he's got more experience. We know against a Michigan, against an Ohio State, if we want any chance to be in this game, I'm not going to say win. If you want any chance to win this game, you got to do what you do well, running the ball and on defense. And then you have to have a quarterback who has an it factor, like I think we've kind of seen flashes from in Luke. That's when you want to see him be able to stretch the field. Right now, for the rest of the game, for the rest of the year, none of these teams, aside from maybe Maryland, are teams where you look at and say, our quarterback needs to go out there and win this game for us. You just got to have a guy that doesn't go out there and lose it for you.
Yeah. And that's, again, I just think there's more still going for this team than some of their opponents going forward, than most of their opponents going forward. And it's got to start Saturday. So, Harry, here's what we'll do. We'll keep in touch, of course. I'm sure we'll be texting on Saturday. Hopefully it is a relatively uneventful game. And like you said, and like I'm hoping for, kind of like last year's Wyoming and Chattanooga games, you didn't hang 50 on him. You didn't need to. You controlled the game and you look good doing it. That is all I really need Saturday. And I actually do think we get that based on the strength of the defense and getting the running game established and playing with a lead. But maybe next week, Harry, we can talk ahead of the Purdue game. I think we'll have a better idea if this team cleaned up some of those things, because Florida Atlantic is that kind of nice region between, they aren't bottom of the barrel, they are not FCS, but they're not Big Ten West quality. It's the kind of game where you, I think, can take away a little bit of what you saw and project it going forward. It seems to be right in that nice middle spot for a game where you can still get better. Yeah,
they're a middle of the pack Conference USA team, which is, the kind of competition where you want to be able to get some good game film on. That's what FAU is. And then, what you want after these next two, games, you want to be flying into that Nebraska game with no worries, just an explosive game against the Cornhuskers. That's what you want after these first two.
I hope that's the case, Harry. Well, as always, hanging with Harry. That's what we call the segment, Harry. I love alliteration.
Hanging with. Is there anything else that maybe? Yeah, that's the easiest one. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
Yeah, we'll brainstorm. We can text on that. But again, next week, hopefully we can talk about some good things we saw and I think this week is just get some mojo back. I mean, last thing to ask you, how, obvious question it may be, how important is confidence for a football team?
It's important. You want to be able to see that, you can do what you want to go out there and do, because at the same time, it starts with, it starts in practice. These guys, any motivation, any kind of confidence they have is going to be built from seeing that they can do what they want to go out there and be able to do. And, it starts in practice, but then once you go up against a team, whoever it is, because they're not FCS, they're Conference USA, it's not great competition. It's the easiest game you're probably going to have all year, aside from Northwestern, because they are a tire fire. The confidence is going to come during practice this week, seeing that you can do what you want to do, and then more so if you're able to do what you need to do against FAU and get a big win. And by big win, I mean point-wise. You want to win this game by 3 scores.
It would have been funny if after I asked that question, you said it's not important.
It's not important, Carp. I don't know what kind of question it was. You don't need any confidence.
It's like this is what you got your journalism degree for? Jesus Christ. All right, Harry, we'll talk next week. Always appreciate the time, brother.
All
right, Harry Black joining us for Hanging with Harry, FAU edition. So as we wrap up today, we will be back on Sunday, hopefully to cover just an efficient, effective Illini performance. Get the mojo back, get the win, feel good going into Purdue. You know what I said? You got to win these 3 games. You have to. Otherwise, we're just asking questions all year. I don't want to do that. Let's have some fun. Beat FAU and then beat Purdue and then beat Nebraska. And then what the hell when you go to Maryland? I think there's still a good team somewhere over there. And this is why a year 3 of Bielema, and I'll keep this mantra going, year 3 Bielema has to beat year 1 Walters and year 1 Rule, and especially year 1 or 2, whatever it may be, Tom Herman at FAU. So time to get out of here. Hope you have a great rest of the week and enjoy your Saturday tailgating. We're going to a concert Friday, Queens of the Stone Age in Indy, with opener the Viagra Boys, this great rock band out of Sweden. It's going to be a hell of a show. Get to bed, get a little bit of sleep, drive back for the tailgate. So be sure to come out and say hi to the tailgate. Might get there a little bit later on Saturday, but it looks to be a great late summer day. Great day for football and a great day for Illinois to get back to 500 and feel good about themselves. They need to start feeling themselves in that way, that unlike the Toledo game, a way that you're feeling yourselves and also still hungry. And I would imagine they'll be hungry going into that Purdue game the following week as well. All right, DPDO, I'm on at dpdo.com for all the best deals and prices, dpdo.com. And I hope we can get a celebratory calzone after the FAU game on Saturday at dpdo.com. State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com. For life, auto, home, business, renters, you name it, Brian is my guy, and he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Give them a call at 217-841-4728 to get your furnace check scheduled. That's Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. And finally, Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. Check out their gallery online of kitchen, bathroom, patios, decks, home additions. Great work, great craftsmen, and excellent customer service from owenbuildersllc.com. Champagne Showers Podcast Network, and thank you for listening and making us part of your Illini sports rotation. And rate and review us. If you can just take a second on Apple Podcast, give us the star rating. It really helps us when people are trying to look for new Illini podcasts to add to their rotation. Have a great rest of the week, everybody. And if I don't see you in the tailgate lots on Saturday, I'll see you right back here in the basement for a podcast on Sunday. It is the 200 level.